11 people are dead. 9 of them were children. Their names and locations are now documented in the official record of the May 2026 UK heatwave. A 15-year-old boy recovered from Swanholme Lakes in Lincoln on May 24th. A 13-year-old pulled from Leadbeater Dam in Halifax on May 25th. A 16-year-old girl recovered from the River Tame near Kingsbury Water Park. A 16-year-old boy who entered a lake at Rother Valley Country Park. Predictable. The word sits there and does not let go. HuffPost UK published its question on May 26, 2026, the day after Britain provisionally broke its all-time May temperature record at Kew Gardens, and the day that record was broken again. The headline was direct. Are politicians taking the climate crisis seriously enough? It was not a rhetorical question. The article that followed it, drawing on the Climate Change Committee's landmark report published 6 days earlier, on the government's response to that report, on the decisions of successive administrations over the past decade, and on the specific condition in which Britain found itself during its hottest May in 142 years of records, provided an answer that the political class in Westminster has been given the tools to act on for years, and has consistently chosen not to prioritize. The answer is no, not in any individual or partisan sense. This is not a failure of one party or one administration in isolation. It is the accumulated failure of a political culture that has consistently treated climate adaptation as a future problem, a funding competition with other urgent spending priorities, and a subject where the institutional language of ambition substitutes for the physical investment of money into infrastructure. And while that political culture has been deferring, people have been dying. The specific numbers that place the political response in context are not projections. They are records. The UK Health Security Agency has documented that more than 10,181 people have died in heat-associated deaths in the United Kingdom since 2020, not projected to die, already dead. The breakdown by year tells its own story. 2,256 deaths in 2020 across 3 heat episodes, 1,634 in 2021 across 2, 2,885 in 2022, the peak, across 5 episodes that included the July event that first pushed temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius in British history, 2,295 in 2023, 1,311 in 2024. The West Midlands had the greatest heat-associated death rate in 2024 at 38 deaths per million people. The Southeast saw the highest total at 259 in a single year. These are not abstract statistics. They are the numerical record of what has been happening to the British population every summer since the climate shifted into territory the country's infrastructure was not prepared for. And every year, that number has accumulated against a background of political conversations about net zero targets and clean energy strategies that have not translated into the specific, physical, expensive work of making the buildings people live in survivable during the heat that is already arriving. The Climate Change Committee's report, published on May 20th, the same report that found Britain was built for a climate that no longer exists, that recommended air conditioning in hospitals by 2035, that called for a maximum workplace temperature law, that warned of 10,000 heat deaths per year by 2050 without action, cost £11 billion per year to implement. That is the CCC's own estimate for the annual investment required across all adaptation measures: heat, flooding, drought, infrastructure, farming. £11 billion, against a current annual damage cost that the same committee documented at £60 billion per year, against a projected damage cost of £260 billion per year by 2050, if nothing changes. The investment case is not subtle. Every pound committed to adaptation generates multiple pounds in avoided damage costs within the investment window. The committee was not asking for charity. It was presenting arithmetic. And yet the political response to that arithmetic, across successive governments over the years, during which the CCC has been making the same case with progressively more urgent language, has been to commit to the direction while systematically underfunding the destination. HuffPost UK's analysis of where the current Labour government stands on the climate crisis is specific and fair. Energy Secretary Ed Miliband is focused on making Britain a clean energy superpower by 2030, a mitigation goal aimed at reducing future emissions. That ambition is real and deserves acknowledgement. But the HuffPost piece identifies the tension directly. The party is facing pressure to bring down energy bills right now, which would mean turning back to fossil fuels in the short term. That tension between the political imperative of immediate cost of living relief and the longer-term imperative of decarbonization is the structural political difficulty that no administration has yet found a durable way through. And crucially, it is a tension that exists at the mitigation level of the climate policy conversation. The adaptation conversation, the one about air conditioning in care homes, maximum workplace temperatures, building regulation reform, flood defense investment, water supply resilience, has not even reached the same level of political salience as the mitigation debate, despite being the dimension of climate policy that directly determines whether people live or die during the heat events that are already arriving with increasing frequency. The 11 deaths during the May 2026 heatwave are directly comparable to the 13 deaths recorded during the July 2022 heatwave, the event that produced Britain's first 40-degree temperature. During and after that event, the political and media response was significant. The London mayor described the fires and deaths as a glimpse of the future for London and the UK. The Met Office's chief scientist said that unless greenhouse gas emissions were reduced, similar heatwaves could occur every 3 years. Multiple parliamentary committees commissioned inquiries. The government defended its environmental record while acknowledging that infrastructure upgrades would take years, and then the years passed. The November 2022 Climate Change Committee Progress report described the UK as strikingly unprepared for the impacts of climate change. The 2024 Progress report said essentially the same thing with more data. The 2026 report, published 6 days before the temperature record fell twice in 2 days, said it again, with the word urgently added. The political conversation has been circling the same diagnosis for 4 years, while the infrastructure gap between the buildings people live in and the climate those buildings now have to manage has continued to widen. The drowning deaths are the most visible and immediate human cost of May 2026's heatwave, but they are not the only cost the month is producing. The UKHSA Amber Heat Health alerts that covered 8 regions simultaneously represent a health system under sustained pressure from a population seeking emergency care for heat-related illness in facilities that themselves lack adequate cooling. The Environmental Audit Committee's projection of 7,000 heat-related deaths every year in the UK by 2050, a figure that sits uncomfortably alongside the 10,000 deaths figure projected by the Climate Change Committee in its May 2026 report, is not the result of a warming that has not yet begun. It is the extrapolation of a trend that is already in the data. The 10,681 deaths since 2020, the 2,185 in 2022 alone, the Amber Alerts that were active across the country on the same days that children were drowning in cold water. This is not the future risk that adaptation investment is designed to address. This is the present cost of the adaptation investment that has not been made. The political answer to HuffPost's question exists in a specific and uncomfortable form that the political class has not yet been required to deliver publicly. It is this: the cost of adequately preparing Britain for the climate it now has is £11 billion per year. The cost of not doing so is £60 billion per year in damage now, $260 billion by 2050, and a mortality rate from heat-related illness that the Environmental Audit Committee projected at 7,000 deaths per year. Every year that the adaptation investment is deferred, the damage cost compounds, and the mortality accumulates. The question of whether politicians are taking the climate crisis seriously enough is therefore answerable with a specific financial test. Is the government committing £11 billion per year to climate adaptation? The answer is no. Current climate adaptation investment in the UK runs at a fraction of that figure. The gap between what is being invested and what the committee says is required is not a rounding error or a timing difference. It is a structural shortfall that exists because adaptation spending does not have the same political salience as energy bills or NHS waiting lists or housing targets, even though its human cost in lives and pounds is larger than any of them in the medium term. There is a specific political irony embedded in the timing of May 2026's heat event that HuffPost's article gestures toward without fully developing. The heatwave arrived during a period when green action had fallen down the agenda in Westminster, the phrase the HuffPost podcast used to describe the political climate. Green action falls down the agenda when there are more pressing, more visible, more electorally immediate priorities competing for the same political attention and spending. Energy bills fall, NHS waiting times rise, mortgage costs remain elevated, housing delivery falls short. Against each of those priorities, climate adaptation investment loses the competition for political salience because its benefits are distributed across decades and its costs are immediate, while its failure cost, the deaths and the damage, appears as a series of emergency responses rather than a single attributable political failure. The 11 deaths of the May 2026 heatwave will be counted in a UK HHSA annual report. They will be noted in parliamentary committee evidence sessions. They will be referenced in the next CCC progress report as further evidence that adaptation is falling behind the pace of warming. They will not, in all likelihood, produce the specific accountability moment that causes a government to commit £11 billion per year that would change the trajectory of the numbers. The public understanding of how political decisions translate into physical vulnerability during heat events is one of the most important gaps in the current climate conversation. When a child drowns in a cold lake on a 35-degree May afternoon, the immediate cause is the cold water and the heat that draws them to it. The upstream causes, the absence of funded outdoor water safety programs, the inadequacy of public cooling infrastructure, the lack of statutory guidance on safe outdoor activity during amber heat health alerts for schools and youth organizations, are political decisions expressed as absences. When an elderly person dies in an overheated flat during an amber alert, the immediate cause is their body temperature rising beyond the point of physiological management. The upstream cause, the absence of a building regulation requiring adequate thermal management in residential properties, the absence of funded cooling pack distribution at the scale the CCC has recommended, the absence of a legal entitlement to a safe ambient temperature in a home, are also political decisions expressed as absences. The language of climate policy tends toward the things that have been done: targets set, strategies published, departments reorganized, international agreements signed. The deaths accumulate in the spaces between those things, and the gap between the commitment and the infrastructure, between the report and the regulation, between the warning and the protection that should follow it. That accountability gap between the deaths and the policy response that would prevent them is the real answer to HuffPost UK's question. Are politicians taking the climate crisis seriously enough? The 11 names on the list of those who died during Britain's hottest May in history, 9 of them children, are the measure of that gap, expressed not in pounds or percentages, but in the only unit that should matter to a political system whose stated purpose is to serve the people who live inside it. The reports have been written, the warnings have been issued, the cost of acting and the cost of not acting have both been calculated and published in documents that sit in government archives alongside years of unanswered recommendations. What comes next is not a question of knowledge or of scientific uncertainty or of technical feasibility. It is a question of political will, expressed as budget lines and regulatory mandates and building standards and legal thresholds. The specific, unglamorous, expensive machinery through which political commitments become physical protection for the people most at risk. The answer to that question is being written every summer in water and in heat by people whose names appear in annual statistics rather than in the political speeches that describe their deaths as preventable. The 11 deaths of May 2026 are this summer's entry in that record. The question HuffPost UK asked on May 26th will be asked again, and until the answer changes from not yet to yes, the record will keep growing.